At 10:30 hours on May 27, 1942, a green Mercedes convertible slowed for a hairpin turn at the junction of Kirchmayerova Street and V. Holesowicka Street in the Prague suburb of Liban. The driver shifted into second gear. The car descended toward the center of the city. Inside sat SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, Deputy Reich, Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, head of the Reich Security Main Office, architect of the Holocaust, the Butcher of Prague, the man who chaired the Wannsee Conference that organized the final solution, the third most powerful man in Nazi Germany after Hitler and Himmler, and he was riding in an open car without escort. At the tram stop, Josef Gabčík stepped forward. He pulled a Sten submachine gun from beneath his raincoat. He aimed at Heydrich from 10 feet away. He squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. The gun jammed. Gabčík stood frozen, staring at the weapon that had betrayed him. Heydrich saw the assassin. Instead of ordering his driver to accelerate away, Heydrich stood up in the vehicle and drew his pistol. He would kill the attacker himself. This was hubris. This was fatal arrogance. And this gave Jan Kubis the seconds he needed. Kubis threw a modified anti-tank mine at the Mercedes. The mine struck the rear wheel. It detonated. The explosion tore through the right rear fender. Metal fragments, glass shards, horsehair from the upholstery, spring steel from the seat cushions, all became shrapnel. The debris penetrated Heydrich's left side. Rib fractures, diaphragm torn, spleen lacerated, fragments embedded deep in tissue. Heydrich collapsed. The driver jumped from the vehicle. Kubis ran. Gabčík ran. Walczyk, the lookout, ran. The assassins escaped into Prague. Heydrich was dying. 8 days later, sepsis from the infected wounds would kill him. The only successful government-organized assassination of a top-ranking Nazi official, Operation Anthropoid, had succeeded. The price would be terrible. 2,000 Czech civilians murdered in reprisals. The village of Lidis razed. Every man and boy over 14 shot. Women and children sent to concentration camps. The village of Ležáky destroyed. The Czech resistance decimated. The 7 paratroopers who conducted the mission would die in a crypt under a church, surrounded by 700 SS troops, fighting to their last bullets, then taking their own lives rather than surrendering. But Heydrich would be dead. The butcher would never butcher again. That was the mission. That was the price. Eduard Beneš, president of the Czechoslovak government in exile, had calculated it was worth paying. The story begins not with the assassination, but with the occupation. On March 15, 1939, Wehrmacht forces occupied Bohemia and Moravia. Slovakia became a puppet state. Czechoslovakia ceased to exist. President Beneš fled to London. He established a government in exile, but by 1941, that government had a problem. The Allies did not fully recognize its legitimacy. The Munich Agreement of 1938 had ceded the Sudetenland to Germany with British and French approval. Britain and France had effectively consented to Czechoslovakia's dismemberment. After Germany occupied the remainder of the country in 1939, the legal status of Beneš's government was ambiguous. Britain had not recognized the occupation as illegal initially. The Soviet Union did not recognize the government in exile at all. More critically, Czech resistance inside the protectorate was minimal. By 1941, Heydrich's policies had pacified the population. He arrived in Prague on September 27, 1941, as acting Reich protector. His predecessor, Konstantin von Neurath, had been considered too soft. Heydrich was not soft. He declared martial law immediately. In the first 5 days, 142 people were executed. Their names were posted throughout Prague. Between September 1941 and February 1942, Heydrich ordered 4,000 to 5,000 arrests, 400 to 500 executions. Anyone suspected of resistance or anti-German sentiment was eliminated. The terror was systematic. The terror was effective. But Heydrich also used incentives. Czech industrial workers received wages equivalent to German workers. Food rations were adequate. Cultural activities continued under supervision. Heydrich's policy was carrot and stick. Cooperate and life continues normally. Resist and die. The Czech population mostly cooperated. Acts of sabotage decreased by 73% within 6 months. By spring 1942, the Protectorate was the most pacified territory in occupied Europe. This was catastrophic for Beneš. A pacified population suggested no need for liberation. A cooperative Czechoslovakia allied economically with Germany undermined claims that the Czech people opposed occupation. If resistance was dead, what was the government in exile governing? Beneš needed to demonstrate that Czech resistance existed. He needed an action so dramatic that the world would recognize Czech opposition to Nazi rule. He consulted his intelligence chief, Lieutenant Colonel František Moravec. Together they conceived Operation Anthropoid. Assassinate a high-ranking Nazi. Prove the resistance was active. Force reprisals that would radicalize the population. Demonstrate to the Allies that Czechoslovakia remained a belligerent nation deserving full recognition. The target was obvious. Reinhard Heydrich, born March 7, 1904 in Halle an der Saale, Germany, son of an opera singer and a Catholic mother, joined the German Navy in 1922. Dismissed in 1931 for conduct unbecoming an officer after breaking his engagement to one woman to marry another. Joined the SS. Recruited by Heinrich Himmler to organize the intelligence service. Created the SD, the security service. Rose rapidly through brutality and competence. By 1934, headed the Gestapo. By 1939, controlled all Nazi security services as head of the Reich Security Main Office. On January 20, 1942, chaired the Wannsee Conference that coordinated the final solution to the Jewish question. Heydrich was not just a high-ranking Nazi. He was the architect of genocide. Killing him would strike at the heart of Nazi terror apparatus. Training began in Scotland. The British Special Operations Executive, SOA, established facilities at various locations for training resistance fighters and saboteurs. The Operation Anthropoid team trained at STS-25, a facility near Inverness. Later at Cholmondeley Castle in Cheshire. The trainees were Czech and Slovak soldiers who had escaped to Britain after the occupation. They volunteered for special operations. They underwent parachute training, weapons training, unarmed combat, sabotage techniques. They learned to kill efficiently. They learned to operate behind enemy lines. They learned they would probably die completing their missions. Józef Gabčík was 29 years old. Born April 8, 1912 in Plovdiv, Slovakia. Trained as a locksmith. Joined the Czechoslovak army in 1932. Escaped to Poland after the occupation. Made his way to France. Evacuated to Britain after France fell. Joined the Czechoslovak forces in exile. Volunteered for special operations. Quiet. Professional. Dedicated. Selected to lead Operation Anthropoid. Jan Kubis was 28 years old. Born June 24, 1913 in Dolny Vilimovich, Moravia. Worked in construction. Joined the Czechoslovak army in 1934. Escaped to Poland. Followed the same route as Gabčík to Britain. Volunteered for special operations. Trained as demolitions expert. Gregarious. Sociable. Loyal to Gabčík. Selected as second operative for Anthropoid. Additional operatives trained for other missions. Adolf Opalka. Józef Walczyk. Karel Kurda. Others. They would parachute into Czechoslovakia on multiple missions. Anthropoid was the priority mission, but several teams would insert simultaneously to create confusion and support resistance networks. On December 28, 1941, a Halifax bomber departed RAF Tangmere. It carried 3 two-man teams. Anthropoid Team, Gabčík and Kubis, Silver A Team, Adolf Opalka and Karel Kurda, Silver B Team, Józef Walczyk and Józef Boblik. The aircraft flew across occupied Europe. Flak damaged the aircraft over Austria. The pilot navigated by dead reckoning, attempting to reach the designated drop zones near Pilsen. At approximately 0200 hours on December 29th, the teams jumped. Weather was poor, visibility near zero. The teams were scattered across the countryside miles from their intended landing zones. Gabčík and Kubis landed near Nehvizdi, approximately 20 kilometers east of Prague. They buried their parachutes and equipment. They made contact with the underground resistance through prearranged channels. The resistance was not pleased. The protectorate was pacified. Heydrich's terror had crushed organized resistance. The remaining groups operated cautiously, avoiding attention. Now British-trained assassins had arrived with orders to kill the Reich protector. The reprisals would be catastrophic. The resistance leaders sent urgent messages to London. Cancel the mission. The assassination would accomplish nothing strategically. The reprisals would destroy what remained of the resistance. The civilian casualties would be enormous. Do not proceed. Beneš received these messages. He consulted his cabinet. Some ministers agreed. The risks were too high. Others argued the mission was necessary. Czechoslovakia needed a dramatic gesture to demonstrate active resistance. The debate continued for weeks. Finally, Beneš made his decision. The operation would proceed. He broadcast a message via BBC radio confirming the order. Anthropoid would not be cancelled. Gabčík and Kubis began planning. The initial idea was to attack Heydrich's train. They scouted the route from Heydrich's residence at Panenska Breziny, 14 kilometers north of Prague, to his office at Prague Castle. The train was too secure. Guards, armored cars attached to the train. Attacking it would be suicide without achieving the objective. The second plan was to ambush his car in the forest between his residence and Prague. They prepared to stretch a cable across the road to stop the vehicle. They waited for hours. The weather was poor. Heydrich's schedule changed. The team was called back. The third plan was to attack him in Prague itself. This was riskiest because escape would be difficult in the city, but it offered the best chance of success. By early May, rumors circulated that Heydrich would be transferred to France. German resistance there was growing. Berlin wanted Heydrich's skills applied in a new theater. If he left Prague, the opportunity would be lost. The team had to act. They selected the hairpin curve in Liban. Heydrich's route to Prague Castle passed through that intersection every morning. The curve forced the vehicle to slow. Buildings provided cover for the assassins. Tram stops provided plausible reasons to be standing at the location. The site was optimal. On May 27th, the team assembled. Gabčík would be primary shooter. Kubis would throw the bomb if shooting failed. Valcik would be lookout, positioned up the street with a mirror to signal when Heydrich's car approached. They wore suits and carried briefcases. They looked like clerks going to work. Gabčík concealed the Sten gun under his raincoat. Kubis carried the modified anti-tank mine in his briefcase. Valcik had a pistol. They arrived at the location at approximately 0900 hours. They waited. Heydrich's routine was precise. He left his residence at approximately 1000 hours. He drove in an open Mercedes convertible. His driver was SS Oberscharführer Johannes Klein. No escort vehicle. No bodyguards. Heydrich considered Prague safe. He considered himself invulnerable. This arrogance was his vulnerability. Other Nazi officials traveled with heavy security. Heydrich flaunted his lack of protection as demonstration of his control over the protectorate. At approximately 10:25 hours, Valcik flashed his mirror. Heydrich's Mercedes was approaching. Gabčík and Kubis prepared. The car descended the hill toward the hairpin curve. Klein shifted gears. The Mercedes slowed to approximately 15 miles per hour. Gabčík stepped forward. He raised the Sten gun. He aimed at Heydrich from approximately 3 meters distance. The gun jammed. The Sten was notorious for jamming. Inadequate maintenance. Dirt in the mechanism. Defective magazine. Any number of factors could cause failure. Gabčík's weapon chose that moment to fail completely. Heydrich saw him. The assassin stood in the open holding a weapon. Heydrich's tactical training took over. He drew his pistol. He ordered Klein to stop. He would kill the attacker. Klein braked. The Mercedes came to full stop. Heydrich stood up to shoot. This gave Kubis his opportunity. While Heydrich focused on Gabčík, Kubis threw the anti-tank mine. The device was a modified No. 73 grenade. British-designed. Cylindrical. Approximately 2 pounds of explosive. Designed for attacking tanks but suitable for assassinations when modified. Kubis threw. The mine struck the right rear wheel. It detonated. The explosion was devastating. The blast tore through the vehicle's rear section. The door was blown off. The fender disintegrated. Shrapnel sprayed outward. Heydrich and Klein both took fragments, but the blast also propelled debris from inside the car into Heydrich's body. Horsehair stuffing from the seats, spring steel coils, fabric. This material was contaminated with bacteria from normal use. When it penetrated Heydrich's body, it carried infection deep into tissue. This was not immediate death. This was mortal wounding that would kill slowly. Both assassins fled. Gabčík ran up Zenklova Street. A tram was approaching. He jumped aboard. Klein recovered from the blast and chased him on foot. Gabčík shot Klein in the leg. Klein fell. Gabčík escaped. Kubis ran toward his bicycle parked nearby. Bystanders tried to stop him. He fought them off and rode away. Valcik had already disappeared. Within 2 minutes, all 3 assassins were gone. Heydrich was on the ground, badly wounded. Klein was shot in the leg but conscious. The scene was chaos. Bystanders screamed. Someone called for an ambulance. A Czech policeman arrived. He commandeered a truck and transported Heydrich to Bulovka Hospital, approximately 500 meters from the attack site. At the hospital, surgeons operated immediately. The damage was severe. Rib fractures on the left side, diaphragm laceration, splenic damage, fragments embedded throughout the left torso. Surgeons removed the spleen. They extracted visible fragments. They irrigated the wound cavity. They closed. Heydrich survived the surgery. Initial prognosis was guarded but hopeful. If infection could be prevented, recovery was possible. But infection could not be prevented. The wound was contaminated. Antibiotics existed but were not available in Prague. Penicillin was still experimental in May 1942. Sulfa drugs were used but were inadequate against the bacteria introduced by the contaminated debris. Over the next several days, Heydrich developed fever. His condition deteriorated. Sepsis progressed. On June 4, 1942, at approximately 0430 hours, Reinhard Heydrich died. Cause of death: septicemia from infected wounds sustained during the assassination attempt. The Butcher of Prague was dead. The Nazi response was immediate and massive. Hitler was enraged. He ordered 10,000 Czechs executed immediately. Himmler and Karl Hermann, Frank, deputy Reich protector, convinced Hitler this was excessive. Mass executions without cause would create martyrs and inflame resistance. Better to be systematic. Identify everyone connected to the assassination. Execute them, and everyone who helped them. Destroy entire communities if necessary. Make the price so terrible that no one would dare resist again. The Gestapo investigation was thorough. Witness statements were collected. Physical evidence was analyzed. Fragments from the bomb were examined. The Sten gun Gabčík dropped was recovered. British manufacture. This proved Soviet involvement. The assassins were identified through informants and surveillance. Their contacts were traced. The resistance network was penetrated systematically. On June 10, 1942, the Nazis destroyed Lidice. The village was accused of harboring the assassins. This was false. The villagers had no connection to Operation Anthropoid, but Lidice had been identified by the Gestapo as having resistance sympathies. It was selected for exemplary destruction. All 173 males over age 15 were shot. All women were sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp. 8 children were selected for Germanization. 81 were murdered in gas vans at Chelmno. The village was burned. The buildings were demolished. The rubble was leveled. The name Lidice was removed from German maps. The village was to be erased from existence. On June 24th, the village of Ležáky was destroyed. 33 residents were shot. The village was burned. The destruction of these 2 villages was announced publicly. The message was clear. Resistance would be met with collective punishment. Everyone would die. Everything would be destroyed. Terror would be total. The assassins remained hidden. The resistance sheltered them despite the risks. Gabčík, Kubis, Valčík, and 4 other paratroopers from different missions hid in the crypt of the Cathedral of Saints Cyril and Methodius on Reslova Street in Prague. The Orthodox priest, Bishop Gorazd, provided sanctuary. The church had a crypt accessible through a narrow entrance with ladder. The crypt had 1 small ventilation window at street level. 7 men could survive there if supplied with food and water. They would wait until the manhunt subsided. Then escape to the countryside or attempt exfiltration to Britain. But they were betrayed. Karel Kurda, one of the paratroopers who had jumped with Anthropoid team, gave them up. Kurda was 28 years old. From Moravia, he had trained in Britain with the others. He parachuted as part of Silver A team. He operated in Prague after landing. When the reprisals began, Kurda panicked. On June 16, he walked into Gestapo headquarters. He told them everything. The paratroopers' identities, their contacts, where they were hiding. He did this for money and immunity. The Gestapo paid him. They promised his family would be safe. Kurda betrayed his comrades for survival. On June 18, 1942, at approximately 04:15 hours, 700 Waffen-SS troops surrounded the Cathedral of Saints Cyril and Methodius. They attempted to enter the crypt. The paratroopers fought back with pistols and grenades. The SS could not force entry through the narrow access point. They tried flooding the crypt by connecting fire hoses to the ventilation window. The paratroopers blocked the water flow. The SS tried tear gas. The paratroopers used wet cloths to filter the air. The siege lasted 3 hours. The crypt became a fortress. 7 men held off 700. Finally, the SS realized that the situation was futile. The crypt was impregnable from above, but it was also a trap. The paratroopers had limited ammunition, limited supplies. They could not escape. Eventually, they would be forced to surrender or die. The SS decided to wait. At approximately 0700 hours, the firing from the crypt ceased. The SS cautiously approached. They found 7 bodies. The paratroopers had fought until their ammunition was exhausted. Then they saved their last bullets for themselves. Gabčík shot himself. Kubis shot himself. Valčík shot himself. All 7 committed suicide rather than surrender. Their bodies were removed. The Gestapo photographed them. The photographs were used in propaganda, claiming the assassins had been killed. Bishop Gorazd was arrested on June 27th. He was tortured. He confessed to sheltering the paratroopers. On September 4th, 1942, he was executed by firing squad at Kobylisy shooting range in Prague, along with 2 priests and senior church officials. The Orthodox Church later glorified him as martyr. The Cathedral of Saints Cyril and Methodius was closed. It reopened after the war as memorial to the paratroopers. The families of the paratroopers were arrested. Gabčík's sister Anna was executed. Kubis's mother and relatives were sent to Mauthausen concentration camp. Most did not survive. On October 24, 1942, 252 relatives and supporters of the paratroopers were executed at Mauthausen. They were confronted during interrogations with the severed heads of the 7 paratroopers impaled on stakes. Then they were murdered. The revenge was total. The terror was complete. The estimated death toll from Operation Anthropoid reprisals varies. Conservative estimates place civilian deaths at 1,300. Higher estimates exceed 5,000. The Gestapo documented approximately 1,300 executions directly related to the assassination investigation. But additional deaths occurred during the general terror following Heydrich's death that cannot be directly attributed. Entire families were wiped out. Communities were destroyed. The Czech resistance was decimated. It took years to rebuild underground networks. The strategic consequences were mixed. Heydrich's death did not slow the Holocaust. His replacement, Ernst Kaltenbrunner, continued the policies Heydrich established. The death camps operated at full capacity. The deportations continued. The final solution proceeded on schedule. In that sense, killing Heydrich accomplished nothing. One architect of genocide was replaced by another. The machinery of murder continued, but the political consequences were significant. The assassination demonstrated that Czech resistance existed. It proved the government in exile remained relevant. It forced the British government to repudiate the Munich Agreement formally. On August 5, 1942, Britain declared the Munich Agreement null and void from the beginning. The territorial changes imposed in 1938 were illegitimate. Czechoslovakia's borders would be restored after the war. This was diplomatic victory for Beneš. The assassination had achieved its political objective. The destruction of Lidice created international outrage. The British and American press covered the atrocity extensively. Memorial committees formed. Cities renamed themselves Lidice in honor of the destroyed village. The Nazi brutality was exposed to the world. This helped cement Allied resolve. The enemy was not just militarily powerful. The enemy was barbaric. There could be no negotiated peace with such a regime. Total victory was necessary. Lidice became symbol of Nazi evil just as the assassination became symbol of Czech resistance. The moral calculation remains controversial. Was killing Heydrich worth the civilian deaths that followed? Beneš argued yes. The assassination demonstrated Czech resistance and secured diplomatic recognition. The reprisals, while terrible, were predictable. The Nazis would have killed thousands regardless. At least these deaths served a purpose. Critics argued no. The assassination triggered reprisals that destroyed communities and decimated the resistance. Heydrich would have been killed or captured when the war ended anyway. Assassinating him in 1942 accomplished nothing worth the cost. The paratroopers themselves understood the price. They knew the reprisals would be savage. They proceeded anyway. Whether this was courage or fanaticism is perspective. They were soldiers following orders. They were volunteers who could have refused. They chose to complete the mission, knowing they would die, and knowing thousands of civilians would die because of their actions. This is the nature of resistance operations. Civilians pay prices for military actions they did not choose. The legacy of Operation Anthropoid is found in memorials across the Czech Republic. The Cathedral of Saints Cyril and Methodius crypt is preserved as national memorial to the heroes of the Heydrich terror. The walls still show bullet marks from the final siege. The Operation Anthropoid Memorial stands at the Assassination site in Lebanon. Bronze figures represent the Paratroopers, a memorial fountain in Leamington Spy. England commemorates the 7 paratroopers and honors the town where they trained. Streets are named for Gabčík and Kubis. Films have been made, books written. The story is taught in Czech schools as example of resistance and sacrifice. But the controversy persists. Czech historians debate whether the assassination was justified. Some argue it was necessary demonstration of resistance. Others argue it was irresponsible provocation that caused unnecessary deaths. Communist authorities after the war were ambivalent. The operation was conducted by non-communist Czechs serving a government in exile allied with Britain. This complicated the narrative. After 1989, the debate resumed. Today, the dominant view is that Operation Anthropoid was heroic and necessary. But dissenting voices remain. They ask whether symbols are worth lives, whether gestures are worth reprisals, whether the price paid justified what was gained. The answer depends on values. If political legitimacy matters more than individual lives, the assassination was justified. It secured recognition for the government in exile. It demonstrated Czech resistance to Nazi rule. It served strategic objectives even if tactical consequences were terrible. If individual lives matter more than political symbols, the assassination was crime. It triggered reprisals that killed thousands. It accomplished nothing militarily. It sacrificed innocence for diplomatic gains. There is no objective answer. Only choices about what matters and what prices are acceptable. Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubis died in a crypt on June 18, 1942. They completed their mission. They killed Reinhard Heydrich. They died rather than surrender. They are remembered as heroes or as agents of catastrophe, depending on who tells the story. What is undisputed is that they acted with full knowledge of consequences. They knew reprisals would follow. They knew they would die. They proceeded anyway. Whether that was courage or fanaticism or simply duty, history records their choice and its costs. Heydrich died. Thousands of Czechs died. The resistance was crushed. The government in exile gained recognition. These are the facts. The judgment is left to each person who studies the story and decides what they believe about sacrifice. Symbols, and the prices nations pay for gestures that mean everything and nothing simultaneously.